Thank you. So morning folks, my plan today is to just give you a bit of a snapshot of some of the best stuff that I've learnt straddling the worlds of survival instructing and change management, and some of the similarities and differences in those worlds, and particularly some really practical tactics for dealing with pressure and transition moments, which I think we face all the time. I don't know about you, but you know, there's very few times in any kind of operation anywhere that I've seen lately where people have got their feet up on their desk wondering what's going to happen next. I had a guy say to me in the 80s, you know, the most important hour of a meeting is the hour before it starts. You should sit and contemplate what's going to happen and who's going to say what and what the outcome should be. It's like I don't see too many people with an hour before a meeting. These days you're lucky if you get there on time, sliding in sideways from the one you've just come from. So, you know, how do we manage those transitions? Because they're all an opportunity to build stress and pressure. They're all an opportunity for clarity and effectiveness, and they're also an opportunity to lose it a bit. And we'll try and explore a few insights about that. Because we're a small group and the nature of the group, one of the things I love about speaking to audiences like you folks, you're in a room like this because you love to learn, you're interested in your own progress development, you're interested in your business moving forward. So I would rather go down rabbit holes that are useful rabbit holes to you than just play to a script. I've got a script in my head and I'm quite happy to play that and see where it takes us. But if at any point you want to press fast forward and skip past something a bit or slow me down and dive deeper, just do that and we'll take that as we go. We can be as flexible as you like. So just by way of, I guess, giving you a bit of context for this, some intro to what we did in the survival world. So I worked for 20 years in one of the world's leading arid area survival schools as a senior instructor. So my job really was to take people into the bush and make life as hard as I possibly could for them, to maximise uncertainty, to maximise pressure, to push them deep into duress around things like fatigue, food, hydration, all of that sort of physical stuff, and to just try and get them to the point of being really reactive, because that's what kills people in survival situations. It's not actually the circumstance itself, it's actually what people do about it, and it's when they get reactive and do something that's ill-advised. And I'm sure you can see echoes of that everywhere, right? Most of the stuff that happens to us where in hindsight we go, that was a bad idea, it was because we acted without really knowing what we were doing, and often acted from a space that was highly reactive rather than thought through. You know, we're not using our superpowers in those moments, are we? We're kind of like, oh, I just stepped way over a line and I'm sort of scrabbling to get back to that edge somewhere. The peak experience in this was a 10-day walk that was filmed in '99 by National Geographic. They came and did a doco on it, and they said it was the toughest thing they could find anywhere in survival outside the military globally. And the main difference was that the military stuff always includes escape and evasion, which definitely adds an area of pressure. You know, while you're doing that stuff, someone's trying to hunt you down. There's definitely pressure in that. And we'd literally give people a soapbox-sized survival kit, a couple of litres of water, whatever clothes they were wearing, and a heavy-duty rescue blanket, so like the ones that come out of your first aid kit, but better quality. And they'd walk about 200 kilometres in 10 days, and they'd find all their own food and water as they went. So it was a bit like Bear Grylls, only real. Some of Bear's stuff is a bit dodgy, right? So it's like any other field, there's, and I think, you know, one of the advantages of a group like this, you've got to choose your advisors carefully, because there's people who say, I know what to do in those environments. They sound the real deal, but what they've got to tell you is snake oil of some sort. And the only way you can tell is you taste the snake oil and you go, oh, that didn't work. So one of Bear's bits of advice, for example, drink your own wee to stay hydrated. You know, he was big for that on telly. Don't know about you, but it doesn't appeal that much to me. But I thought, well, being an expert in this space, I should find out whether that's actually a useful thing or not. I'll talk to some medical people rather than just try it in the bush, you know. So I spoke to a few mates that are fairly well versed in medicine, and all of them said, no, bad ideas, toxins your body's putting out, you put it back in, it's not going to help you at all, and particularly not if you're dehydrated. And a doctor mate of mine said, Mike, in fact, it'd be better if you drank someone else's. And I don't know about you, but that didn't actually increase its appeal at all. But it might explain why there's tea bags in some survival kits, perhaps. Anyway, so good thing we've all had our cups of tea, probably. So I'd come from that world and I'd parachute back into the world of change. And I noticed that increasingly similarities between both environments, where you've got people under pressure of some sort, and a lot of the patterns of behaviour were really similar and really predictable, and the results were quite the same as well. But the difference is, out there, it's a very clean operating environment, not much complexity at all. It's literally just where are we going to get to by the end of the day, where are we going to sleep, what's going on, how do we manage a tiny little group of people, and that's it. There's no global environment to deal with, no financial or regulatory framework. It's very straightforward. And the feedback loops are very, very aggressive and rapid. So you get to see the results of how you're thinking and what you're doing, usually within a matter of hours and certainly no more than days. You come back to this kind of world and you go, well, the complexity's high, the amount of people involved is usually a lot, and it's very difficult to tease out, is what's happening as a result of how I'm responding to that set of circumstances, or is it the environment, is it the other people in it? And it could be decades before the results actually show up. And so this whole thrive and adapt thing is really about helping people to kind of make sense of people under pressure, whatever their environment is, through that lens. So something I noticed really significantly, and we'll sort of platform most of what we do today around this. Pretty much all of this is in the book, by the way. When we deviate, I'll let you know. So unless, if you want to take notes, by all means do, but if not, it's in there. The big thing I noticed, and you've seen this yourself, right, is that people face a set of circumstances, whatever they are, and their response will be different. So this room full of people, we could throw something at us and all of us would have a different response to that. And some of us would be more effective than others. And I reckon one of the things we get tied up in that's not particularly useful is we get worried about, well, is it right or wrong? Is it good or bad? Is it black or white? All that sort of territory. For me, the only question that matters is it effective or is it ineffective? If it's ineffective, then how do I shift it? How do I do something different? And I got fascinated, particularly in the world of survival psychology. There's a whole arena called the survivor personality, what makes people survive against the odds. And a lot of what you see in entrepreneurs, in people that do really well in high change environments, is actually the same stuff. So a couple of the keys are they've got a respect for but loose adherence to rules. So they're not rule breakers, they're not law flaunters, but they're quite happy to operate outside of the constraints of conventional thinking if the conventional thinking's not effective. They've got an optimism that's very, very tempered by reality. So it's not a blind rose-coloured glasses sort of optimism. It's an optimism that says we can definitely get what we need done in the way that we would like it to happen, and we've got a lot of control and influence over that. But when reality throws barriers at them, they acknowledge them head on. So people in survival situations will say, we might die before breakfast, but we're going to do everything that we can do to stack the deck in our favour so we're still here to watch the sunrise. So this circumstances response. Some people see opportunity, they spread calm, others go into a victim tailspin. What's the difference? So I think on that line between the two, how you see the world, whether or not you can shift your perspective if it's not serving you, and the kinds of things you consistently do to set yourself up for success, in my mind, are the things that make up that recipe. So we'll just unpack a little bit of that, particularly around the see and shift. I think for me, if you can kind of understand where your perspective comes from, how it's made up, then you can use it as a tool rather than just being almost a victim of it. Our perspective is so inherently built into us that sometimes it's hard to see it as a perspective. You know, we feel like it's the only way to see the world. And so, to me, understanding it a bit is useful. So let's just map it out. It all starts with data. So any information that's indisputable is data, right? So, you know, if we looked around the room and there was a video camera, which there actually is today, recording things. So we could get Jürgen's tape and we could send it off to someone. We could get it transcribed word for word. It could describe where everyone's sitting, what they're wearing, all of that sort of stuff. And that is data. It's undisputable stuff that says, you know, it doesn't matter which way we slice it. There is no interpretation or opinion about it. It is just what it is. So we're surrounded by that all the time. One of the things about human beings is that we filter it extensively, and if we had longer I'd get into that in a heap of detail, but if we just did a quick tour of the room, the physical data in this room, most of it just slides into the background. We don't actually notice it. Perhaps you did the first time you came in. You know, you might have walked through this door and seen that amazing view out there. And a few of us this morning, with the spring sunshine shining off the lake and things like that, we paid a bit of attention to it. But before long, it just kind of fades into the background. You know, these amazing pieces of timber in here, beautifully blended with the aluminium. You know, it's really artfully done. This carpet and the pattern on it, that's all data. You know, the black chairs. This one's got a few sort of bum print patterns on it from being sat on a lot. Folding trestle tables with this amazing intricate locking mechanism. These are all bits of data. You know, this mug and the drip down it that actually you can only see from this side. The guys on that side of the room can't see it. All data, and we filter it extensively. So some of the research around that says, you know, we can hold between 3 and 5 bits of data in our conscious awareness at one time, and if we're really comfortable and in an environment where we're competent, that might go up by 3 to 5, so, you know, maximum of around 10. The rest of it all just gets pushed out. It's filtered out either consciously or unconsciously. So all that stuff just fades into the background for whatever our focus is right now. The other bit of research says between 70 and 80% of what happens in the environment around us goes straight through to the keeper. We actually miss it. And that's the territory where magicians do their work. You know, they either distract the 20%, so pay attention over here, and while they're doing that, it's like, how did that elephant get into the room? Or they just rely on the fact that you're not really paying attention anyway. You know, and they manage to pull all sorts of swifties that, to our perception, looks like reality is happening in front of us, and it's like, how can that be? So once we filter stuff, then we start to interpret it, and that's where life gets really interesting. I reckon this is the source of all the conflict, friction and tension that people experience, is our interpretation. So I'll give you an example of this. You know, I did a session for Main Roads recently. It was a group of pilots, you know, the guys that escort heavy loads up the highway. So spent a lot of time alone in a cab, and I reckon, based on my short interaction with them, I reckon there's a reason for that. It's a self-imposed exile, not overly social. And I asked them, we had a long session, it was almost a full-day workshop, so I asked them, what are your expectations of today? You know, it'd be good to know that. There's about 15 people in the room. There's a guy, Steve, down in the front corner here, and he sat there with his arms folded and he said, Mike, I have no expectations. So, okay, thanks, Steve, welcome. The next bloke's name was Dave. He sat there with his arms folded, no expectations, Mike. We went around the room, all 15 of them, no expectations, Mike. What are some of the interpretations I could have of that? That's data, right? They all answered with their arms folded, no expectations. What are some of the ways I could interpret that?
Disengaged.
Yeah, they're completely disengaged. They don't care. Yep.
Just don't want to be there.
They don't want to be there. I'd rather be out on the highway. Yep. Yeah. Who is this bloke? Who cares? Get me out of here. Complete lack of understanding. I don't know what's coming. Yep.
Or they're just happy to be in the moment.
Happy to be in the moment. I don't know what's coming, and I'll just take it as it comes. Yep. Possible. What else?
They don't rate you very highly.
They don't rate me very highly. Yeah, a mate of mine downloaded that book and it's crap. Yeah, this is going to be a hard day. Yeah. What else might be possible?
They've been to so many of these sessions before.
Yeah, track record says these things are just disengaged now and just, you know, tough it out until the end. Yep. Somebody said once they could be just radically open-minded. I'm up for whatever you can teach me. somebody said, "Oh, you'd be offended, wouldn't you, Mike?" And it's like, "Oh, would I? Why?" And she said, "Well, it's rude. They've obviously told them nothing about you and what you're going to do, and it's just offensive, you know. It's just poor form on the part of the organisation." Oh, okay, I'd be offended then, you know. So how we interpret things has a big play on what we do next, right? And it's not necessarily the data. So any of those possibilities could have been true of those guys. Perhaps all of them were represented. It could have even been a peer pressure thing. Steve at the front said, "No expectations." So did Dave. And by the time we get around, those are the heavy hitters in the room, you know, but get around the other side, I'm not going to say anything different to what they said. No expectations, Mike. You know, not going to get some guy suddenly go, "Actually, I've got a stack of expectations. I'd like you to tell us all about this." Sort of keeping my head down. So from our interpretations, we tend to form beliefs. And the interesting thing about those is we think they're the truth. We think they're self-evident. And we think that they're based on all the data. So I sometimes call this the human illusion. We fool ourselves somehow that we've seen it all. And from there, we take action. And you would know from being in groups like this and being in business that that leads directly to our results. What our actions are equal our results. But all of this stuff happens beforehand, almost in the background, and we fool ourselves that we act on data. And it's never true. At best, we act on incomplete data. We act on heavily filtered data. We act on biased views of data. Now, sometimes those filters and biases, you know, remember back to that question, effective or ineffective, every single business that is successful has versions of that are highly successful. They go, "I know that if we enter the market in this way, with this kind of approach, this sort of attitude, deal with our customers in this kind of way, the result is success." And you just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. But we also have versions of it where we run into walls and we go, "That's so frustrating. I feel like I'm back at the beginning of a loop." And it's remedial school. I thought I learnt this lesson when I was 20. Why am I back here again? We have versions of it where we get one or more parties just not seeing eye to eye, and we feel like we're communicating clearly, but the message is just not getting there. George Bernard Shaw once said, "The main problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place." And this is part of the reason why. We think, because it feels self-evident. How I see it is so obvious to me that if I start to unpack it for you, that'll seem tedious and painful to both of us, surely. So why would I inflict that on you? And the result is we fall into a whole heaps of gaps and assumptions and bits of territory that really aren't clear. I noticed one of Alan's things around here, not quite sure where it ended up hanging up, but it was about something about clarity equals power or clarity equals success.
Clarity leads to power.
Clarity leads to power. Yeah, I think that is so absolutely true. One of the biggest things that we can do is build clarity with the people around us that are the most significant and meaningful in our existence. Just a little extra detail of this is that there's a thing called confirmation bias, and so we have a loop that, again, not particularly conscious, but we start to scan the environment for evidence that what we think is true is actually true. And you know, a good example of that is if you decide to buy a car, all of a sudden you see them everywhere, and it's your brain telling you that that's a good decision. Unless it's a Maserati, of course, then you're looking for, yeah, it's the only one in the state, there's none out there. So that, you know, we actually look for evidence that how we see it is true. Comments, thoughts, questions about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going through that with particular old memories under great stress at the moment.
Yeah.
And I sat down about 3 or 4 weeks ago and we agreed on a course of action. And I knew he wasn't too happy about the course of action. Yeah. Anyway, so then, despite many contacts with him, I hadn't heard from him.
Yeah.
And so I was then interpreting that he was pissed off, he didn't want to do it,
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. So I was just going through that whole process there. I
Yeah.
said, yeah, you're right. And then actually I caught up with him 2 or 3 days ago.
Yeah.
And he's just totally stressed because he's so overwhelmed as
Yes.
a result of all the action that we did take.
Yes.
He doesn't actually have time to actually talk to me because
Yeah.
he's got all these leads he's actually got to sell.
Yes.
So I was interpreting the lack of feedback as a negative,
Yeah.
but in actual fact it was a positive.
Yeah.
So it was amazing. I went through the whole
Yeah.
thing because I was going through.
And I find that loop often happens for me around follow-up. Personally, I'm somebody who, if I want to do something, I'll just do it. And so follow-up, if it's coming at me, actually annoys me. It's like, look, I'll either make that decision or I won't. When I do, I'll act on it. Don't bother me. I'll get back to you. But the amount of people I call, and in my head, I've got that they're going to be just like me. I'm going to pick. So I'm sitting there. I'm just waiting for them to go, bugger off, leave me alone. I'll get to you when. But the amount of times you hear, oh, thanks for the call. That's been on my list. I haven't dealt with it. So thanks for the reminder. Can you send me? Whatever. So how we frame that stuff makes a big difference to how we do it, right? For me, that just a couple of people saying thanks for the follow-up, go, okay, well, there's another whole perception in there that says that's a value add. Me ringing them is a value add. So I'll do that until the cows come home now with no trepidation. And if I run into one like me, it's like, sorry, mate, I'll leave it to you and, let me know if you need anything. Easy as pie. Any other thoughts or comments?
Are people predisposed to dealing with the data, like you talk about filtering?
Yeah.
The story is we have 3 boys.
Yep.
One's when they were young.
Yeah.
One's hyperactive.
Yep.
The household runs. Then all of a sudden there's a huge bloody crash.
Yep.
And we go into his bedroom.
Yeah.
And he's actually laying underneath the wardrobe.
Yep.
And the wardrobe's on the floor.
Yeah.
My wife is with me, and she says, "How did you get under there?"
Yeah.
Right? And I said, "How do we get him out from under there?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, that's our life.
Yeah.
That's it. My wife's response is the same every bloody time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm loving this. How can I sort of widen that view? But and that's why I'm really interested.
Widen her view, you mean?
And maybe even my own. I didn't really care how he got under there. We
Yeah,
deal with that later.
Yeah.
The thing was to get him out from underneath
Yeah.
the wardrobe.
Yeah, yeah.
He'd actually pulled it down
On top of himself.
So,
Yeah.
but in a nanosecond, her immediate response was, "How did you get under there?"
Yeah, yeah.
And both responses are perfectly valid.
Yeah.
Because she's thinking, how did he get under there? I don't want this to happen again. So she's solving the future problem where you're solving the
immediate.
now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
And I'm exactly the same.
Yeah. So I guess I'm really keen to how do you bring that into your consciousness? Is knowing about it.
Yeah.
Going to bring it into your consciousness and
So the answer,
reset how you think about it.
the answer is yes and no.
Yeah.
So much of this stuff happens invisibly. It's much easier to see it in other people than it is to see it in ourselves. That's one of the challenges. So in practical terms, often it's a case of working backwards. Look at the results you get or say, here are the results I want. What kind of actions do I need to take? Therefore, what sort of beliefs do I need to drive those actions?
Yeah.
Are those beliefs authentic to me? Are they what beliefs I currently hold? If not, I can insert others. One of the beauties of this thing is those beliefs are rubbery as hell. They're not based on anything real. They happen entirely in our head.
Would a relatively recent high-profile example of the Lloyd Rainey case be a good example to talk through in this situation? I'm not sure if anyone saw the documentary where the police investigation really, at early stages, identified him as the sole suspect. And, obviously I'm not an expert in this area, but from the evidence presented in that show, there was a whole case of this where data was used in a particular way to actually follow a course of action that was filtered and interpreted and police performed.
Confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's actually a really, that diagram I think fits into that whole case.
I've done a bit of stuff. I've done a bit of stuff with WAPOL and federal police, and it's a loop they identify really well. When they drag cold cases out, often the actual solution, the actual criminal is really obvious, and it's exactly that. The original investigators have formed a conclusion and they're excluding all else pretty much. So the answer to your question is that it's very difficult to change anybody else. It's hard enough to change ourselves, right? to build awareness is a really interesting thing. And I think part of the solution to this stuff for me is that if there's any of this, so you're talking about a bit of this, right? My wife sees it differently to me, and so that creates, big or small, it creates some friction, you know, at least in that moment of, well, you know, this is more important. The more understanding that we can have, the more that we can surround ourselves with people who do think differently to us, the more power we build, the more our blind spots are revealed. And you know, I think that's one of the advantages of a group like this as well, is that you go, okay, well, I'm not just trying to do it myself, I'm surrounding myself with people who do see the world differently. I would imagine that some of the people around this table probably make you slightly uncomfortable. You go, actually, that point of view, just, it causes a bit of dissonance in me. It doesn't sit comfortably. But the very fact that it does that, it's like, well, that's shining light into something that you're potentially unaware of, or potentially is a blind spot for you. So I think, to me, the recipes are look for difference and see what you can learn from it, difference, and also switch on curiosity. So one of the principles of Thrive and Adapt is be curious. You know, it's like when that sort of tension, friction and conflict arises, get curious about what are the other points of view that exist here and why are they there. And I think Ray Dalio, his recent book Principles, well worth a read if you haven't read it. One of the things he says is believability rate the opinions that you expose yourself to. So it's not about just picking up and adopting any old stuff, because some of the points of view out there, let's face it, are garbage. A good mate of mine said opinions are like bums. Most of them have got one. Most of us have got one, and most of them stink. So, you know, it's not a case of just absorbing the whole lot. So his believability weighted principle is to say, well, if you're in a room full of people and this person has got a bucket load of experience in engineering and the problem you're trying to solve is an engineering problem, their opinion should be worth significantly more than the cleaner, who might have a point of view on it that may well have gold in it. So hear what they've got to say. They might innovate in some kind of way that the engineer can't think of, but this opinion's got to be worth more just because of what they know, yeah? So it's kind of a bit of a case of balancing that. But I think being curious, asking questions, understanding why and how people's point of view is what it is. So, you know, for your wife, why do you think that way in those sorts of situations? And you probably find, you know, I switched straight into action mode as well. I evacuated my wife off a remote East Coast island in Malaysia once after she broke her ankle. It was an hour waiting for a boat, and then an hour by boat, and then an hour by car to the nearest decent medical help. And she describes me as being cold and uncaring in that experience, because from my point of view, it was just a logistical problem to solve. And that was the most important thing. The most important thing is to get us to medical help as quickly as possible. But how did that experience show up for her? Well, you know, she rolled off her ankle. She's fallen on top of it. She's rolled off it. I'm reputed to have said, I don't recall actually saying these words, but I'll take her word for it. You don't need an orthopaedic surgeon to tell you that that's going to need surgery. It was obviously stuffed. And then my next thing was, and because you need surgery, giving you any drugs, food, water is just going to delay that process, so you're just going to have to suck it up. Not my finest hour, but to her credit, she did, and you know, we got to hospital and pretty much straight into surgery, partly because of that response. But you know, in my head, that's all about, you know, right, let's just take the effective action. We can deal with the emotion and the pain and all of those other things when we've got the time and space to do that. Other people would deal with it differently, and it's neither good nor bad, right nor wrong. The question is it effective or ineffective, and that's all that counts. I could have been more effective in those moments by saying a few things that just felt like there was some care there, rather than just a military operation. But, you know, I don't think the action was ineffective. The approach perhaps was. So, you know, it's all about that. So I think you can get better and better at seeing this in yourself. And that's what I meant before about the more obvious your own filters and beliefs and biases, etc., become to you, the more you can use them as tools rather than just be pushed around by them. So you can actually lay it out in front of you. almost like a magnifying lens and go, I see the world this way because of my experience, because of my life, because of how it's been lived, and I can use that to look at things in a particular way, and sometimes that'll be highly effective and sometimes I'll need to seek a different view from mine, but I've got it in front of me rather than it being in the back of my head bumping around and going, well, I did that but I got no idea why. Yeah? Happy to move on? Oh, that didn't work very well, did it? So just want to talk quickly about some of the states we get into when we're really reactive, and this is all about fight, flight or freeze, and you'd be familiar with this clip. This is Mick, so let's just have a look at Mick in his... Mick's not playing, there he is. In his shark attack moment, 2015, he's going through fight, flight or freeze there, and it's a great example of it. He does all three. When the shark first hit him, he froze for a minute, then he tried to get away, and then he turned back towards it and actually fought the shark off. And in this moment, he's literally swimming for his life until he sort of gets to, okay, there's jet skis here, that's a smarter approach. But, you know, he's not actually thinking for any of that. This guy, Jeff Wise, Extreme Fear, The Science of Your Mind in Danger, fascinating book. The whole thing is about fight or flight, and he said two things that I think are really key about this reaction. One was, the image of the plane on the cover is, they took some people skydiving with functional magnetic resonance imaging gear on their heads, and for the first, they'd never skydived before, for the first 3 to 5 seconds of their free fall, zero frontal cortex activity. So that part of our brain that makes humans so bloody marvellous totally shut down for 3 to 5 seconds. So that's interesting, but we're usually not in situations that extreme. But he said that shutdown happens in even the most mild of situations. It's not a total shutdown like that, but it slows down. The reason is that's too slow. If we think through things in those situations, too slow, you know, shark attack, too slow. Coming down the freeway this morning, if something flew off the back of a truck and the car in front of you hit the brakes and it slides sideways, even if you had the kind of brain that could calculate it and you went, oh, you know, closing speed of about 23 metres a second, I need, you know, 2 psi on the brake pedal and about a 3-degree course deflection. Even if you could calculate all of that, by the time you did, you'd be picking airbag out of your teeth. It's too slow. So it shuts that down and just gets you to do something. That's the whole point of it, and over years that's worked pretty well for us. We're mostly still alive, you know. So, sometimes it doesn't work, but mostly it works well. So Jeff said, even in situations like meeting someone for the first time, you know, when Rob and I shook hands as he came in, there's a little bit of that reaction that happens. It's part of the reason why it's hard to remember names when you are first introduced people, because when they're saying Rob, your frontal cortex is going, you're going, you know, there's a little moment, even if it's not a threatening environment, of I'm not quite sure what the outcome of this encounter will be. Is this a person who's going to be friend, foe, easy to deal with, socially awkward? You know, I don't know all that, and it's a little bit of fight or flight. It's why when you're at a party and you're with your very best friend that you've known since primary school and someone says, can you introduce me to your mate? So I've known him since primary school. He's a good mate of mine, and I think that's where that Aussie thing of mate, this is me mate, you know, came from. And then a little while later you go, well, of course I know his name, I've known him for years. But there's that moment, if you're a subject matter expert in something, you're sitting around a table and someone lands a question on you without notice. Every now and then you go, look, I've spent my entire life dedicating my brain and my knowledge to that area of expertise, and placed on the spot like this, I can tell you nothing about it. And then a short while later, it's you're back on form. It's this thing shutting down. So
3 to 5 seconds.
it's like a yawning chasm. To you, it feels like an eternity. Yeah. So just have a really quick chat about some of the reactions that you've personally observed. So let's talk about the mild end, right? So not interested in the traffic accidents, the, you know, ankles on the east coast of Malaysia, the wardrobe on your son, the, you know, epic business failures, you know, the big moments. We're talking more about day-to-day stuff. What are some of the reactions that you've seen where people fight, flight or freeze and what do they look like when they're not the extreme? So the extreme, you know, the fight will be, I get in there and I fight tooth and nail literally for my life. When it's less extreme, that might just be, you know, I might raise my voice and puff myself up a little bit, or, you know, push my chair back or make myself look bigger. Flight will be, well, run away in the most extreme circumstances, but it could just be, you know, avoiding somebody, not making the call, that sort of stuff. Freeze could just be inaction, and sometimes flight and freeze are hard to tell apart when it's not extreme, right? So just have a quick chat with one or two people around you. What are some of those reactions? What do they look like? So you've got a few examples of just, you know, dialing into those conversations. Sound like good examples. You know a bit what it looks like. I reckon the important thing to know is it's not a logical state. This thing's out to lunch, you know. And so what often happens, my observation both in change and survival and in many other situations with people in business and in life, is we try to logic or push in those situations, and the person on the other side of the equation is not in a logical state, and usually all that does is increases their reactivity. So it's a case, we've got to find ways of slowing that down first, and we'll talk about some practical stuff for that in just a sec. I reckon one of the important ones to know about is, what are your classic reactions? So again, not in the extremes. The extremes for me are like we talked about, Malaysia, you know, it's just switch on to action, get it done, you know, fight mode, go, 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 till it's sorted. In less extreme situations, fight for me looks like I'll start to talk very, very quickly. I'll get a sarcastic edge. I'll try to argue you into corners. I won't give you any space to respond. If I can, I'll make you look silly and give you no room to manoeuvre at all. And when I feel my mouth running off like that, I know that I'm in a reactive space and I really need to just dial it down. That's me in fight mode. In flight mode, which is my other alternative, it doesn't look that dramatic. I'll sit there and I'll look like I'm listening to you really intently. I'll go, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But really, my head's actually somewhere else. I'm out of the building. Elvis is gone, you know. So I'm not actually paying attention. That's me in flight mode. Not particularly effective. What does it look like for you? Just scribble it down for yourself. 1, 2 or 3 classic reactions in mild territory where you know your buttons have been pressed a bit, you're not operating at your best. What does it look like for you? Because if you can recognise it, you can pull yourself out of it quicker. So then we promised you some tactical tools, so things that can work in the pressure moments. We talked about those transitions at the start. You know, we go from one thing to another to another. In the modern world, you know, you wrangle your household to get out the door, whatever that looks like. You know, kids, dogs, husband, wife, whatever your arrangements are. You head out your door, you're straight into traffic, and that's curious in Perth, especially if it's raining. Everyone seems to forget how to drive. And you get cut off a couple of times and potentially fired up, maybe a bit angry out of that. And then your first meeting of the day is a budget meeting. They're always interesting, aren't they? You know, it's never about we've got too much money, help us spend it. It's always, you know, things are tight. How are we going to work that out? You might go from that budget meeting straight into a performance management conversation. I don't know about you, but they're some of the most difficult and frustrating conversations that you can have in business, and often you feel like you're just going round and round a loop, and it's like, why can't we just get progress on this? So you might come out of that potentially feeling a bit angry, maybe frustrated as well. You know, each of these transitions, you're picking up a little bit of stress. The next thing you might have to do, you know, might be welcome a new person to the environment. You know, maybe a guest, a new customer, maybe somebody who's doing work experience in your business, and you come out of that performance management meeting, all of that's built up, and you walk into that with completely the wrong energy and completely the wrong kind of focus, and without too much trouble, it'd be easy to walk in there, g'day, my name's Mike, welcome to XYZ company, this place sucks, you know, it's just it's all built up. And the worst case scenario, we slide sideways into the door back to our loved ones at the end of the day, and we've built all that up during the day, and we shake the bag full out at the feet of our loved ones and spew it all over them and go, oh right, I feel better now, and they're all going, yeah, great, welcome home. So how can we manage those transitions and those pressure points? I came up with a tool that I call guerrilla mindfulness. Guerrilla as in freedom fighter rather than big black ape. Gorillas are usually outgunned, outclassed in every way, outnumbered usually, and they've got to rely on tactics that are quick in and out, high result tactics. So you've all heard about mindfulness, and there's increasing buckets of research that says, you know, doing some form of mindfulness practice, whether it's going for a run and just paying attention to the stuff around you, whether it's meditation, yoga, you know, whatever, there's huge benefits to doing that. But it's not always easy, not always practical. So I know a number of people, particularly action-oriented people, where you go, well, you know, what do you want me to do? Well, meditate. How am I going to do that? Well, you know, here's a candle. Just gaze at the flame. And they'll sit there and they'll go, yeah, but what do you want me to do? Just gaze at the flame. It's like, yeah, but what do you want me to do? And then, you know, after 10 seconds, the foot's going and the fingers are drumming. It's like, what do you want me to do? It's just gaze at the flame. I'll stuff that. I'm going to go and do something, you know. So some of us aren't naturally predisposed to do things like meditation. It takes work and effort to build the discipline. Worth it, I reckon, but work and effort. The other thing is that doesn't actually serve us in a pressure moment. You know, you can't, in the middle of a high pressure negotiation where it's all going pear-shaped, say, oh, just losing my zen a bit, fellas. Do you mind if we bump out for 20 minutes and I'll just go and sit in the lotus position and get back to you when I'm a bit calmer? You know, you can't do that. It's like what's happening now. Deal with it. And at those transitions where you know you're potentially going from one thing to another very quickly, how do you get the right sort of focus, clarity and intention for whatever you're about to do? This is designed for those moments. So, step 1, 3 long, slow, rhythmic breaths. 3 breaths. Rhythm is the most important part. What the physiological data tells us about rhythmic breathing, particularly if it's deep and slow, is that acts like a bloody great big physiological switch. It literally turns fight or flight off. The two cannot exist side by side.
Does that take 3 to 5 seconds? Is that what that's about?
It depends a bit on how slowly you breathe. Yeah.
I appreciate that, but I mean, is that what that is?
Oh, partly it's that, but it's also the only part of that response that we can consciously control. And if you notice, you know, if you look that Mick Fanning clip up, normally I give a lot more commentary to that if we've got longer. If you look at it, one of the first things that happens is his breathing really shortens up. In fact, the first part of the video is just taking very short in-breaths. That's all he's doing. So as soon as we lose control of our breathing, that's part of that mechanism. It's the only part we can consciously control. In fact, some of the military and heavy response people, you know, TRG, those kinds of guys, they talk about this as combat breathing. You know, rhythmic breathing in the heat of battle means that we can access our training, we can access our information, we can stay fully effective. As soon as we start, we've lost it. You look at fireys on breathing apparatus, you know, you see those bits of footage. Listen to how they breathe. It's really measured, really rhythmic, and it's all about I'm in control here. Now, you won't necessarily stay in control. If you're in a really high pressure situation, that could dip in and out, but as soon as you take control of your breathing, you literally shut that sucker down, at least for the time that you're aware of your breathing. So just have a crack at that while you're sitting here. Rhythm is the important bit. So if you're not sure of a good rhythm for you, in for a count of 3, pause for a count of 3, out for a count of 3 is a good rhythm. Perhaps the first conscious breaths you've taken all day. And having taken those breaths, how do you feel?
Heady. It's been a good dose of oxygen.
Yeah. So it sort of wakes you up a bit. It's like bang, yeah. Anything else?
Definitely calm.
Bit more calm, yeah. Which is quite an observation, right? Because not exactly a high pressure, tense environment, but you still feel calmer, yeah. Anything else?
Slightly more alert.
Bit more alert, yep. Yeah. So they're usually the kinds of things that come out. A bit more focus, a bit more whatever. Occasionally people go, oh, I feel really tired, and that's about how you breathe, right? So there's 2 ways you can do this. Breathe rhythmically into your belly, lock your ribs down, breathe rhythmically into your belly is a great way to relax. So if you're ruminating on stuff, lying in bed awake at night, head's going like a windmill, like churn, lock the chest down. Breathe deeply into the belly, deeply relaxing. You won't be able to get more than 7 breaths if you're consciously focused on them before you're asleep. Now, you might not stay asleep. If your head's really going, you might wake up again and, you know, then the notebook by the side of the table, breathe that way again, you'll go again, you know. It's a really great way to switch off. If you want action, though, that's not particularly useful. You know, I'm about to head into a hostile meeting and you're walking, I feel kind of relaxed and chilled, and you just get arrows fired at you. In that case, lock the core muscles down, breathe deeply into the chest, which is what you see, you know, heavy response people, MMA fighters, that kind of thing. They breathing deeply into the chest, shoulders down and back. And what that's doing is you relax, but you're ready to go. You're fired up. You're super fired for action if you breathe that way. Step 2 of guerrilla mindfulness is to say as clearly as you can, preferably out loud, but that's not always possible or appropriate, how you feel. And the key to this is not to get into the story of the emotion. It's literally just how I feel, and that's it. You draw almost warrior-like boundaries around it. So I don't care about the story. I don't care how I came to be angry, sad, happy, overjoyed, excited, depressed. I don't care about that. I'm just acknowledging how I feel. Out loud helps, but not always possible. So you can do it in your head if you need to. So if you turn to the person next to you and just say no more than 3 words how you feel right now, good or fine don't count. They're not actually feelings. And if you, like a lot of people, and you find that difficult to articulate, a lot of us culturally, it's like, oh, don't talk about emotion, then just identify where you notice yourself in your body at the moment. So, you know, do you feel tight in the chest? Is your neck stiff? You know, some of that sort of stuff is another way to do it. Go. 1, 2 or 3 words. Don't get into the story. If someone says depressed, don't ask. Great response. Yeah.
Relaxed. Interested. I feel quite engaged.
Okay, that'll do you. So the point of articulating your emotion in that way is that it has a profound effect on the stress hormone cortisol. It actually reduces it in your system significantly. There's a bit in the book about more detail about that we won't get into right now, but highly effective in reducing how much stress you feel. And it also acts as a marker. I kind of have a conscious understanding of how I'm feeling. The third part is about action. So that's all kind of, slow down, reflective stuff. But, what am I about to do? What am I heading into? What's my mind frame need to be for that? And so part 3 is what's my intention for whatever I'm about to go into. So if I've come out of that performance management conversation and I'm really cranky and I'm about to go welcome that new person to the business, my focus is not, they don't need that. That's not what this is about. So my intention might be, well, I need to be welcoming and open and calm with that person. And it's just setting a marker in your head. I'll give you a practical example of how I used it once. I was about to give a keynote in Sydney around about 600 people. And as the person was introducing me, it was fortunately much more long-winded than what you agreed to this morning, Dave. I thought, gee, I don't think I've put my phone on silent. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and I had a quick look, and sure enough, it wasn't on silent. And just as I switched it onto silent, it rang. And like an idiot, I answered it. I don't know why, it was just kind of reaction. G'day, this is Mike. The guy on the other end was a bloke I had a fairly long-running dispute over an invoice he hadn't paid. And it had been pretty cranky, and I was on the verge of calling some lawyers into the mix. So the conversation didn't go well, and it pretty much ended up with hanging up on each other, pretty much. Very unsatisfying on a mobile, isn't it? Hanging up. Listen, in the old days, it was like, ding! So much more satisfying, but And then the guy on stage is going, please welcome Mike House. And I'm like, yeah! So I put the phone in the pocket, and I've done exactly what we just talked about. 3 rhythmic breaths as I'm walking up the stairs. How do I feel? I feel angry and frustrated. What's my intention? My intention is to give this room full of people the best of what I know in the most concise way I can in the 40 minutes I've got with them. Game on. So it's a really useful way to just park that acknowledge it. And if you do that at all the transitions that you make, I'd like to say I've got the discipline to do that. I don't always remember to do it. But when I do, I find I float through the day. My perception of what's going on is much clearer and cleaner. I'm a lot less reactive. I'm a lot more focused. I'm a lot more intentional in the interactions that I have. And I usually come home and the bag of stuff to shake out at the feet of the loved ones is a pretty small bag usually. It's more stories, you know, I tell interesting stories about my day rather than stories about my day. Okay, one more tactic and then we'll get into, do you want to say, ask, do anything about that? Otherwise I'll give you another tactical thing that I think is useful for this space and then we'll wrap it up with some questions. Yeah, so I think the second most powerful tactic is that, and I reckon it's particularly relevant in our modern world where progress is a hard thing to see and measure sometimes. You know, back in the old days, most work was really tangible, and some of it's still like that, but a lot of the time it's really hard to kind of put your hands on. I grew up on a farm, you know, it'd rain and you'd go flat out chucking a crop in, and it was hard work but really tangible. Round and round and round the paddock, circles getting smaller and smaller and smaller, cut the corners out, drive out the gate, done. And you'd look back on it like, yeah, we did that. Next paddock, done. Next paddock, done. Seeding's finished. End. You know, new season. Really clear, really easy to see progress. So much modern work's not like that. You know, I've got this to follow up. All these kind of fuzzy ends sometimes, hard to see, and that's hard for people. We've got a disposition, us humans. It's called negativity bias, where our disposition is to give greater weight to negative experiences and problems than it is to solutions and to positive things that have happened. And it's a survival mechanism. It makes sense as a survival mechanism. It's one of the reasons that we have done so much bloody marvellous stuff as a species. We've kind of got this edge to us that says, I'm sure I can make it easier, better, safer, smoother, less effort, you know, whatever. And it's all about, they're the things that I can, you know, how do I knock the corners off that? How do I make it better? And when it comes to our pure survival, you know, you could imagine, say we were living in a cave back in the Neanderthal days. It's going to be terrible for you, but, you know, we share a cave, the three of us. And, I'm sorry. And on Monday mornings, we go down to the local markets. And you and I normally buy some brontosaurus steak. Oh, no, we don't. We buy stone to make some stone tools. You buy brontosaurus steaks because that was just how labour was divided back then. And you cook them for us, you know, medium rare usually. It's come a long way, still a way to go on that front, but that's how it was back then. And on this particular day, we walk out the front of the cave and you get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. It's horrible. Blood, fur, you know, it's just spurting, nasty. Now, that kind of memory gets written into our brain in a way that's actually different to positive memories. It gets put into a different part of our brain via a different mechanism because we never want to forget things like that. If we do, we repeat mistakes over and over and over again. So tomorrow, when we walk out of the cave, we see that orange and black furry thing. I don't want to be going, oh, I wonder what that is. I might go and give it a pat. I want to be going, that's the thing that ate John after you. Sorry. So the mechanism makes sense, but we tend to see, you know, we've got lists of the things still to be solved, the problems that are yet to be overcome, all of that running through our head. And the most simple way to overcome this, we don't want to get rid of it because it's the engine room of progress, but we want to balance it. And particularly in a world where progress is hard to see sometimes, hard to feel. And the most simple way that we can do that is add gratitude. It's another one of the principles from Thrive and Adapt. Gratitude, research has shown, has a profound effect on our physiology and our psychology. We can be grateful for really, really simple things. You know, John and I this morning downstairs, you know, the door was locked and it was Dave, wasn't it? Dave appears, who works here and lets him in just as John's getting ready to, like, oh, how the hell do I, keys, alarms, all of that sort of stuff. John could be grateful for that. It's a fairly small thing. It's certainly much less significant than something like, say, well, I'm not a refugee on Manus Island right now. But the impact on your psychology is about the same. Being grateful that someone made you a cup of tea is about the same, you know, in terms of the impact on your personal psychology, is about the same as something much bigger and much more significant. You don't have to be grateful for big things. And I think as leaders, it's a modern imperative for us to be aware of that and to build gratitude into everything we do really intentionally as often as we can. Both personally, you know, if you can, a great way to do it's a gratitude journal, 3 things at the end of the day that I'm grateful for, why I'm grateful for them. I've got one of those at home I share with Donna. Sometimes I walk past the thing, it sits on the sideboard. Some days I walk past it, I don't have the time or the space to write in it, but I see it and I do the process mentally. Some days I walk past the thing and it's like it's looking at me, you know, it's going, what are you grateful for? And I'm going, nothing, it's been a shit day. Just nothing to be grateful for today. It's been terrible. And on those days, if I'm smart, I pick the thing up and I leaf through it and I go, actually, all these things in here I'm still grateful for. None of it changes. Totally. You know, we talk about a shift of how I see the world. That's all perception, right? It's been a horrible day. I feel bowed down. It's a really fast way to shift how you feel and what's going on. And in our businesses, you know, pausing regularly to celebrate steps, milestones, progress, things people have done for us that are really good. You know, someone asked me the other day in a coaching session, lots of people seem to think that I should thank them for just doing what they're bloody paid to do. It's like, well, yeah, you should. Why not? Why not every Friday or every day go, bloody good work, thanks for being here? Why not? Cost you nothing. Has a profound impact on how they will respond to you, how they will react, how you feel about them. And from a pure feedback point of view, you know, if some of our feedback is strengths and gratitude based, the most high performing teams roughly balance that about 5 to 1. Positive feedback about 5 times as much as negative feedback, which is coincidentally is what this research found, that it takes around about 5 positive experiences to balance 1 negative one. If we've got less than that, we feel like the environment we're in is a negative one. You know, 1 negative thing in our personal relationships can take on unusual proportions if there's not enough to balance it. So we kind of need to address that balance, I reckon, make it a deliberate part of what we do as leaders.
I found that important, and I think it was another speaker that sort of mentioned something similar to that, and I'm very conscious now of acknowledging and saying well done in some way to all the staff every day. Everyone has to at least get a smile and a good to see you, or you did well, or just anything, even the most minor of things. And you can feel the overall mood of the team lifting with that. Yeah, so absolutely, I see that for real.
And you see it profoundly, you know, if we loop back in closing to those survival scenarios, you know, people whose life is genuinely on the line. One of the survivor personality things, the people that survive against the odds, they do that in a profound way when they are staring down the most dire of circumstances. So they literally, you know, we might not live to see the sunrise, but let's celebrate the sunset. Let's celebrate the day. Let's celebrate what was good about the day. And then do our best overnight to make sure we're still here to see the sunrise. But, you know, we can't necessarily control that. We don't have control over every bit of it. And I've seen that over and over again in all kinds of situations. As you said, it lifts the tide significantly. Simple and easy to do. I saw probably one of the best examples I've seen of it in business. I did a thing like this with a school once, a group of around about 100 staff at a major secondary school. And the principal said to me afterwards, you know, I'd finished, she said, come with me, Mike. And we've walked around the corner. And the back wall of their library, you know, has been rendered and painted with some sort of product that meant that they could write on it, non-erasable. And the wall was a wall of gratitude. So parents, teachers, students, anyone associated with the school, anytime they wanted to, could go and write something there about what they were grateful for. And the principal said, this is one of the greatest tools I have in my school. I never appreciated it. It was suggested by somebody in the organisation, let's do this. And they said, yeah, sure, why not? She says, one of the greatest tools I've got. Whenever there's problems, the first thing I do is I pick the people involved in the problem up and we walk around here and we look at the wall. And then we have the conversation about what we're going to do to fix it, with that as the backdrop, rather than just all the problems as the backdrop. Profound, really profound. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, and we can take some questions. We've got around about 15 to get into discussion, questions, details. In the book, there's much more detail. There's a whole heap of QR codes, for example. There's a tool on page 35 that's designed for unpacking your own belief sets and working out what they are and whether they're effective or ineffective in a situation. The QR code there will take you to a downloadable copy of that page with a whole heap of commentary for each column. And there's bits of, if you've got the head that wants to know about the details of some of the research I've mentioned, other QR codes will take you to the detailed papers behind some of that thinking and narrative. And there's other bits of content and information that are all accessible via those. So feel free to dive into it. And all my contact details are there as well if you ever want a chat about how you're using it, how it applies, then, by all means get in touch. And also success stories. I love to hear people giving us a ring and saying, oh, I tried that out and here's what happened. It's always nice to hear too. Okay, questions?
What a great idea with the QR codes. Yeah. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. Yeah, I haven't seen that before, so probably is out there, but that's a great idea. Yeah, having those in the book. Linking the paper with the electronic.
Yeah.
Always keen on that sort of thing. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, though, just when you were saying about productivity throughout the day and everything, one of the biggest, I suppose, changes that I've seen for a lot of people in work environments is that, yes, in older days, you'd start and you'd have a pile of paperwork sitting on this side of your desk
Yeah.
throughout the day, and that pile would actually whittle down and that pile would increase, and
Yes.
you'd sit back and you'd be rapt with what you've achieved.
Yes.
Now, I mean, it's taken us just over 12 months, but we've gone paperless.
Yep.
Now we have absolutely no kind of
Can't
visual
see the progress
perspective of what we've done. Like my partner and I, at the end of the day and everything, it's a case of, so how was your day? What'd you get up to?
Mm.
And as I said to her, we've noticed it actually over the last few days, but it's a case of I'd have to look at my sent emails to actually tell you what I've done because I have no recollection really of what I've just done throughout a day.
Yeah.
There's no record, no nothing apart from what's sitting on the computer.
Yeah.
But that, on occasions, can also get a little bit disheartening throughout a work day because you're sitting there and you've been busy,
Yeah.
but you've got no idea doing what.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you put the principle of add gratitude into that mix, even just putting an intentional pause in once or twice or three times during the day, morning tea, lunchtime, arvo tea as a potential break, and add the tally. Like if you think about how a shearing shed works, at the end of each run, you break for morning tea, and everyone's got a number of sheep that they did, chalk marks up on the wall. And, yeah, righto, that's good, and it's got a direct result. Translates directly back to income. I reckon we can build things like that for ourselves. So for me, I use a to-do list a little bit for that. I use how much stuff's actually in my inbox. I try to process my inbox to zero at least once a week. So it's actually cleared out and stuff's done. So I can kind of see, well, if there's hundreds sitting in there, that's not working so well. If there's none, then that's pretty good. But I think it's a case of finding things that are natural, organic and genuine for you. But it's a bloody awesome observation, right? So how do you put things in there that measure the progress? And it might even just be to have a quick huddle with a couple of people to go, right, what were the milestones between now and morning tea? Or tell us, what have been your wins, what have been your challenges, some way of marking progress.
I agree with the to-do list because I've had to start working on that as my role's been changing, as most probably here know. The old sort of on, not in movement.
Yeah.
But in order to sort of like just keep myself organised, I've got a to-do list. But instead of deleting stuff off of the to-do list, I put a strike through in it. It's all in Word, and I move it down into the done list, which is at the bottom of the to-do list. So it gives me a great feeling when I can. Yeah. So when it's done, it's been struck off the list and literally moved to the bottom of the document. You get that feeling of achievement from it. So I guess that's a bit like the gratitude side of things, but it's just taking a moment to actually move it into the done pile. So it's sort of moving from one side of the desk to the other as such. So
You could
just
you could
happened
have
naturally that I feel good about.
one of those, another alternative would be one of those counters. Every one you do, click.
Unfortunately,
Bucket of-
tasks are not equal.
Buck-
Each day you might get one done.
A bucket of stones and an empty bucket. If it's a big task, move a bigger one. So I think there's lots of ways we can think about that, and it's the more that we can do. I think it loops back to that principle we talked about before: clarity equals power. These are all ways of getting greater clarity. What are we doing? What's effective? What's ineffective? How's that working for us? And if it gives us a sense of, all about perception. If we can build an environment that gives us a sense of progress, of meaning, of purpose, rather than drudgery and I don't know. I feel flat out, but I'm not sure that anything is happening. How much more effective are we? That's why some of this stuff's great, these one-page plans, because you can go back to that and say, well, yeah, totally on track for that today. It's going to take a hell of a long time to smash that out of the park, but, I know I'll move towards it. Beautiful stuff.
How do we get to change our belief systems or even other people's belief systems? Like we were talking about perfectionism before.
Yeah, so changing other people's belief systems is really challenging. And one of the challenges is it's much easier to see it in others than it is in yourself. And so I think we've got to be very gentle and kind about changing other people's. Their perception is just as real to them as ours is to us. And it can be hugely frustrating when you can see those, Michael and I were talking about the 1%ers the other day. You can see the things as if you just did that, that tiny little thing, all of a sudden this whole part of the game opens up to you. And I can see it so clearly, why don't you do that? And for me, the best perception piece I can do around that is ask, what are those for me? How many of those am I missing? If I was in a room with, a mix of amazing people who could see that stuff in me, some of the best coaches, some of the best minds in the world, what would they see in me and how easily could I grasp it? Because it's out of my view. If it wasn't, I'd already be doing it, right? So we've got to be gentle and kind around that stuff. And I think we've got to be ruthless about doing our own work, because if we understand it, if we understand what it's like, we're much more tolerant when we're trying to do that stuff with others. So, one of the principles in here is take on an annual challenge. I've got a principle in life. I go find something every year where it's intentional. I know nothing and it's scary, and I go learn it. And it's deliberately to put myself in that position of being a novice and being a little bit scared and being a little bit unsure. This year, my annual challenge has been to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I question sometimes the sanity of being 50 and starting a martial arts career, but that's what I'm doing. It forces you into that position of, I am a total greenhorn in this room. Everybody is all over me like a rash, in that case physically, and I don't know. It forces you into that position of, what does that uncertainty feel like? I think one of the biggest risks for us as leaders and coaches is that it's easy to feel comfortable in what you know. It's easy to see the effectiveness. It's so bloody obvious. Some of this stuff in here, to me, it took a long time to write it down, because it took a long time to appreciate that people would look at things like that and go, it's not like it's new to me, but suddenly a heap of stuff drops into clarity because you say it that way. I go, well, isn't that obvious? And that's part of the problem of our knowledge. We think it's obvious. We think it's self-evident. We think it's easy to see, which means we tend to go adversarial and hard on people that don't see it that way. And it's a case of trying to walk alongside them and get them to actually do stuff, rather than just, get the preachy finger out and go, what you need to do is. Yeah. And that's a challenge. I think that's part of our evolution as individuals, is the better we get at coaching and teaching, the better we understand the stuff that we know as well. It's a great way to learn.
You talked about optimism before.
Yeah.
Martin Seligman's written the book Learned Optimism.
Yes.
Well, what's your view on that? Can you turn a pessimist into an optimist?
I think you
Well,
can.
or can we turn ourselves?
I think you can. That gratitude journal, for example, you know, some of the research around that says that the people that consistently write down 3 things they're grateful for, you know, the impacts of that echo for literally months after they stop doing that practice. That it makes them more optimistic, it makes them more creative, it makes them better able to solve problems. You know, there's so many benefits. It's absolutely massive. And some of the most recent research about it says they can actually measure physical changes in the brain and brain chemistry as a result of doing that are more about optimism. So absolutely, it can be learnt. Like anything else, there are some things that we have a natural disposition to. You know, if you get someone who's naturally predisposed to meditate and you say stare at that flame, easy, do it all day. Thanks, that's great. Thanks for giving me that tip. I'm loving it. Some of us have to work really hard to do that, and again, it comes back to effective or ineffective. So is time spent staring at that flame going to yield a result that's worthwhile for me? Is time spent learning to be more optimistic going to yield a result for me? And I think the evidence is overwhelmingly yes. But it takes discipline and it takes focus, and it goes against a lot of the stuff that's hardwired in us, like that 5 to 1 thing. You know, that exists, and it exists for a good reason. It's ensured our survival and our success. It's not like we can turn it off. It's not like we want to turn it off, but we do want to balance it. So yeah, just takes discipline and hard work. Same as learning how to get out from under a bloody black belt. Yeah.
I had this guy a number of years ago called Rex Whitby, and he sort of, I think it was about that recognition, and I empowered him. He was a wagon maintainer, and I empowered him to actually purchase the wagon parts, which he'd never had the capability to do, or the authority to do. Anyway, so he started buying all this stuff, and he saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars because he knew what he was buying. Anyway, so I started to give him lots of recognition, and he won these awards, and he had all these things and photographs and in the company magazine and all that sort of stuff. And I used to send him handwritten notes. Yeah, well done, Rex, that was great. And he never, ever said anything. And I thought, oh, this is just complete waste of time. Complete waste of time. All this sort of theory stuff, it has no impact because he never gave me any feedback. Anyway, I left the business, and then he contacted me, or no, I contacted him to see if he could do some gardening. Anyway, I had cause to go round his house, went into his front room, and all framed of all the handwritten notes and all the photographs were on his wall. And I thought, wow, now that it shows to people the power of recognition, but you don't actually ever get any feedback that the recognition is actually doing. Doing that good.
And I think the reality is, you know, we don't know about a lot of stuff, right? We do things where we go, well, I may never know the impact of that. And there's other times where we do directly see the impact, which is again where I think, well, base your actions on the things that are proven to be effective. It's a known effective strategy, so why not do it? It costs very little. It's the effort involved is relatively small, so you can do that. And for some people, it will be more profound than for others. But just because you're not getting immediate feedback that says "good on you, thanks," doesn't necessarily mean that it's not worth doing.
And just going through that same process that Darwin filled out, my interpretation of no feedback was, stop it.
Doesn't matter.
Not going to do this for anyone ever again.
Yes.
Because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And in reality, it was really working.
So profound. Yeah.
So, and I'm sure we all don't do it as much as we should do.
Yeah.
Give that feedback.
Yeah.
You know, I
know I'm crap at it. You know, I actually have to remind myself. So I've got 2 things. You know, talking about things you consistently do to set yourself up for success. I've got a reminder that pings in my inbox. I've only got one staff member, a part-time assistant. It pings in my inbox at lunchtime on Friday, and I always send a message to say, here's a couple of things that you did this week that made a big difference to me. Thanks for your efforts. See you next week. Have a great weekend. To do it. So for the things that take a bit of discipline, that are significant to others, that have an impact, that are worth the investment, you know, find ways to actually build them into your system so they happen regularly and well.
The other thing that's worthwhile considering, maybe just from my perspective, is that most of us in the room, with a couple of exceptions, are of a similar generation, and the generations that are coming through similar generation.
Okay.
It's John and I are the exceptions.
Most
thank you for that
similar,
feedback. Yeah. The younger generations, their ability to, I suppose, give and receive feedback, but also their perception of themselves is far different to when we were growing up, and mental health is a huge issue, as I'm sure we're all aware, but it's epidemic proportions with younger people. And I think this is where some of this stuff, the power of gratitude and saying thanks and caring and showing that we care for our staff, you can't do it enough. You know, you actually just can't do it enough. And I loved your story about making sure that you do it regularly. You just got to keep doing it. There's a great story about Greg Popovich. Greg Popovich is the San Antonio Spurs coach in the American basketball system. Probably the most successful coach over the last 2 decades in American basketball. Won 5 championships in that time. At the end of every, and they get paid like millions and millions of dollars, the players, you know, phenomenal amounts of money. But at the end of every training session, he thanks every player for letting him coach them.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, you know, I mean, I'm crap at that. I'm just really bad at showing my appreciation to my staff. They know I appreciate them, but I'm just terrible at it. And I am, you know, like that personally as well. And it gives me the shits that I'm like that. And I try and change, but, you know, it's a journey, and I just find it very hard.
You feel better if you do it. The other thing is it gives you then the ability to be hard on them when you need to be hard on them, or to show that honesty that you need to show, because you've shown the care and the support when you've shown. You know,
you built up a bit of credit for those 5 smiles
and
against that one.
Say that Greg Popovich is one of the hardest basketball coaches in terms of discipline and standards and holding you accountable for performance that they've ever seen. But he's also one of the most loving and caring guys. So when he dishes it out, it's received the right way. You know?
People have got to know that it's genuine when you are confident.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm worried about. They'll see that I'm faking it.
So the key there is set up systems so that you do it. So like my SCG, you know, set up systems to remind yourself, because it's not necessarily in your consciousness. So that helps to build the if not the habit, then at least the process. And then absolutely genuineness, authenticity in this stuff is crucial. People see from a country mile if it's just rose-tinted bull dust, right? And that will not wash. So it's got to be genuine. And my experience of that is that it's even in the hardest of situations, and that's possibly when it's most important, there's always stuff that you can find that's small that says, yeah, I appreciate that. And you know, I think that's some of the discipline. You know, it's Donna and I have a bit of a thing that we do when we experience conflict, where we will actually at the end, once the dust has settled a bit, we'll actually say at least one thing that we appreciate about the conflict and how the other person dealt with it. And that's sometimes very hard to do, but you can find them. And it's quite powerful, because it says, you know, that us together is more important than whatever separated us. Some of the really gun teams, you know, that connection, whether they're, you know, business, sporting, whatever, that connection is what enables stellar performance, because they have, and you know, we could do a whole hour and a half on this, so I'll just briefly hit it. Is that in the current environment, there's so much uncertainty in the world around us. You know, the pace of change, the you know, regulatory environments, the way things are global, all of that. There's masses of uncertainty. So I think it's kind of important for us in where we're heading as a world, in business, in families, across the whole lot, to build our sense of certainty from within. Because we won't get it from the environment anymore. You know, for the last couple of 100 years, it's been possible to say, I am a plumber, and to define yourself by what you do. You know, we are a, you know, rail specialist, we are whatever, but it's hard for us to do that now, because what that looks like could be changing, in some cases, almost minute by minute. and that leads to us feeling very unsettled. Some of the things that we're talking about enable us to build our sense of certainty from how we are together rather than what the circumstances we face look like, which means whatever circumstances throw at us, whether it's, you know, boom times, great, we're positioned to harvest. If it's really bloody hard, we're positioned to build the wall and hold it. If there's tough times and conflict, we're positioned to actually do that well. If there's hard feedback that we need to give each other for better improved performance, we're placed where we receive that in a way that, well, this is intended for our good, not to harm us. And, you know, I think building that sort of certainty from within is, I reckon, the next evolution of what will make teams really, really powerful in a increasingly uncertain environment. It's not going to get any more certain. It's just going to get more. It's going to get faster and faster, harder and harder, more difficult to predict. Build certainty from within, and some of the stuff we talked about this morning are ways of doing that in spades, worth the investment, I reckon. I'd just like to finish by saying thank you. I always like to finish with a bit of gratitude. Practice what you preach. I'm grateful for two things as I sit here. The first is I'm grateful for your time and attention. You know, an hour and a half in this world is a precious amount of time, and I think it's a privilege, and certainly one I don't take lightly, to speak to any group of people for any amount of time, and it's an even greater privilege when they listen and participate. You know, your participation makes my job a pleasure and a joy, and I thank you for it. And the second thing is thank you for your work in business. I think businesses like yours really are, in some ways, the engine room and the lifeblood of Australia. Small businesses do so much in our community, and, you know, I can't claim to understand much of what you individually do, but I know that collectively it makes a massive difference to the community I live in, whether I experience it directly or not, and I thank you for that too. Hopefully we'll see you out there sometime.
Thank you.